Welcome to Grammar 4F. In this booklet, we're going to go over the perfect form in past tense and degrees of adverbs. So let's start with perfect form. We've already learned the progressive form, and of course we know the simple tenses. Perfect form is a little bit of a different type of animal, and it can be a little trickier because of how you have to conjugate the main verb. So we try to go slowly through the perfect form in this section of Grammar 4. So let's look at our explanation at the beginning of the book. Perfect form is used to clarify the order of past events. What does this mean? Well, when we focus on past perfect like we do in this book, what we're showing when we conjugate verbs into perfect form is that we're indicating the action was completed before another past action. And we're going to look at some examples of that in a few minutes, but that's essentially what we're getting at with perfect form. How do we make perfect form? Well, great question. We're still using simple tenses, but like we did with progressive, we use to be. With perfect form, we want to use the verb to have, and that's why we had you go through and make sure you really understand how to conjugate to have according to the subject. So specifically in Grammar 4F, we're going to look at the simple past tense of to have as our helping verb, and then the main verb will be conjugated according to the perfect form. Most regular verbs will use the same conjugation for the perfect form that is used for the past tense. So as long as you are comfortable with your regular verbs, this booklet shouldn't give you too much trouble. So let's look over and review what these past tense conjugations may look like. So here we have a list of common rules to conjugate to past tense or into the perfect form. So the first one, just add an ed to the end of the word. Super easy. We've known that for a while, since Grammar 1 really. So our example here is to look, which in perfect form or in past tense would be looked. So our example sentence is, I had looked for my toy before breakfast. Notice that looking for the toy occurred before breakfast, which happened in the past. And so that's what we mean when we use past perfect. Next, we have that you can just add a D to the end of the word if it already ends with an E. So here we have to guide. You can see before conjugating it, guide ends with an E. So to make it into perfect form for that main verb, we just add the D and make it guided. So the rangers had guided the group to the trail before the storm. Once again, we're showing that they had been guided and then the storm occurred. So it's a past event before another past event. So now we can also change a Y to an I and add an ED. So our verb example is to carry, which becomes carried. Had you carried the fruit inside before the meat? And lastly, sometimes you may double the consonant and then add ed. So in this instance, we're using the verb to plan, becomes planned with two ends. The group had planned for the camp out before the weekend. So these are all very hopefully familiar to you and something that you recall from learning how to conjugate verbs to past tense. If for some reason you come across a word that you're unsure of, we have a reference page in the back as to how to conjugate to the perfect form. And of course, you're always welcome to use your handy dictionary. But just make sure you're paying attention to your spelling, and of course some of it will be multiple choice, so just make sure you're paying attention to what we're asking for. Now we're going to go on to degrees of adverbs. Once again, this hopefully won't be too hard of a concept for you because we've already done degrees of adjectives, and so degrees of adverbs is not too far of a stretch once you are comfortable with those. So let's just jump right into it. Remember that when we are doing degrees of adverbs, just as we do with degrees of adjectives, we have two forms. We've got comparative and we have superlative. So comparative is where we're comparing two items against each other, whereas superlative is going to be three or more items or people or things. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hop right down to that first rule. When you have a adverb that you need to form into comparative or superlative, you're going to add er when comparing two things and est when comparing three or more things. So harder and hardest. She hit the ball harder than her brother. He hit the ball hardest of all his team. Pretty straightforward, and you're probably already used to this type of adverb anyway. Another very similar one is if the word ends with an E, add R or ST. So later, latest. This movie starts later than the other. That play starts latest of all. So pretty straightforward once again. And of course we have if the word ends with a Y, change the Y to an I and add ER or EST. So early becomes earlier or earliest, depending on how many things you're comparing. And then we have some words that just change forms completely. They don't follow any specific rule, and our example here is well. You don't say weller and wellest. Instead, you say better and best. And there are a number of words that will do this. And the back of the book, we do have a reference page for these irregular adverbs. So just make sure you get familiar with those, and really there are going to be a few that we go over in this booklet, but there could be any number of adverbs that may change, but really there's just a handful that we'll have you be responsible for in this booklet series. And then the last thing we're going to go over is some words will not change. Instead, we add a word, more or most, or less and least, in front of the adverb according to the situation, of course, comparative or superlative. So words like easily would be more easily and most easily. Notice that this word has multiple syllables. That can usually be a telltale sign that that word is not going to have an ER or EST added to the end of it, just because it becomes a really long word and it just sounds goofy when you try and say it. So that's not a hard and fast rule, but that's usually a good rule of thumb. So just watch out for that stuff. Make sure you get yourself familiar. Always reference this page and the page in the back as you go through this booklet. And we'll go on and sentence diagramming. You're in luck with this one. We're not learning any new sentence diagramming. Everything will be review. So just make sure that you're comfortable with what you've already learned, whether it was in Grammar 2 or 3 or what you've learned so far in Grammar 4. So that's pretty much it for Grammar 4F. If you have any questions, please contact the owner of your center or whoever grades your grammar.